Mountain woman and her dog found hidden steel. Door in the forest, inside was a secret bunker of gold. The storm had swept through the Oregon range the night before, rattling pine needles loose like feathers and turning the old ranger trails into slick ribbons of mud. Claire Buckley moved slowly along the narrow path, her boots sinking slightly with each step, the scent of wet earth and cedar thick in the air. Behind her, Ranger trotted, ears twitching, nose low to the ground. He wasn't a young dog anymore. The grizzled German shepherd had a patch of white along his jaw and a stiffness in his back legs that hadn't been there 2 winters ago. But Claire knew better than to underestimate him. He still had the instincts and the heart of a working dog. She paused at a bend in the trail and scanned the tree line. Nothing but fog and moss-draped trunks. The aftermath of the storm had silenced even the birds. Just her breath, the wind, and the soft pad of paws. Then Ranger stopped. Claire didn't notice it at first. She was a few paces ahead, brushing aside a low branch. But when the familiar sound of Ranger's footsteps vanished, she turned. He was frozen, not barking, not growling, just locked in place, muscles taut, tail low, eyes fixed on a moss-covered slope to the right of the trail. "Ranger," Claire said softly. No reaction. She walked back to him and followed his line of sight. A thick carpet of moss blanketed the incline, glowing faintly green beneath the morning mist. Nothing looked out of place, but Ranger didn't move. His nose flared. A low, almost inaudible whine rumbled in his chest. Claire crouched beside him, brushing her hand across the moss. And then she heard it. A click. Not loud, but sharp. Mechanical. The moss shifted beneath her fingers, flaking away to reveal something cold and metallic. Claire leaned closer. It was steel, corroded in spots, but solid. Her heart began to pound. She scraped more moss away. Then dirt, and there it was, a seam. Not a rock, not old machinery, but a door. A flat steel hatch sunk into the earth, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't on any map. She'd patrolled this ridge for years and never seen anything like it. Ranger stepped forward and let out a single bark, loud, sharp, urgent. Claire's fingers hesitated on the edge of the door. Something deep in her gut told her not to open it. Not yet. But something deeper said the truth was waiting just below. She stood slowly, glancing around. No footprints, no trail. Whoever had buried this hatch had done so deliberately. Clean. Professional. Government? Military? She didn't know. But someone had gone to a hell of a lot of trouble to hide it. And now Ranger had found it. She looked at him. His eyes met hers, steady and serious. It wasn't just instinct. He understood something had shifted. Claire's fingers brushed the scar on her forearm, a souvenir from her last wildfire deployment before she walked away from the service. She'd buried enough trauma in this forest, but now it seemed the forest had something buried of its own. She pulled her phone from her coat and tried for a signal. Dead. No bars. Typical up here. She took a photo of the hatch anyway, angling the lens to catch the markings along the edge. There were numbers faintly etched into the steel. Coordinates, maybe. Or a code. Ranger paced now, back and forth near the door, glancing at her. Then the forest. He was nervous. That meant she should be too. She stood up and scanned the trees again. Still nothing. But then, a snap. A twig. Claire whipped around, her hand instinctively moving towards the knife on her belt. No movement, no shadow. But Ranger had heard it too. His ears pointed straight back towards the trail. His body blocked hers, head low. They weren't alone. Claire whispered, "We're leaving. Now." She backed away, tugging Ranger gently by the collar. He didn't resist. They moved quickly, silently, retracing their steps. The hatch stayed buried behind them, shrouded once again in mist and moss. By the time they reached the tree line behind her cabin, Claire was soaked with sweat despite the cold. Her mind raced. What the hell had they found? Inside the cabin, she slammed the door, latched it, and dropped to her knees beside Ranger. "Good boy," she whispered, burying her fingers in his thick fur. "You did good." Ranger didn't relax. He stood at the window, eyes still trained on the woods, growling low. Whatever they'd uncovered, it wasn't just forgotten. It was protected, and someone, somewhere, might already know it had been found. Claire Buckley had never believed in soulmates until she met Ranger. He came into her life not with the soft whimper of a broken animal, but with the raw, defiant growl of something that had seen too much and refused to bow to it. Claire had found him 5 winters ago, caged and shaking at the back of a small-town animal control center in Joseph, Oregon. He'd been listed as unfit for adoption, too aggressive, too reactive, too damaged. A failed K-9 dropout from the state police program. They said. Not worth the risk. Claire took one look at the German shepherd's amber eyes and knew that wasn't true. He hadn't growled at her. Not once. He just stood there, rigid, as if daring her to see him for what he was. Not a mistake. Not a monster. Just misunderstood. That day, she filled out the forms and walked out with him on a frayed nylon leash. The clerk muttered something about signing her own liability waiver. Claire didn't care. She knew broken things. She lived with one inside her every day since Luke's accident. Her husband had died up in those same mountains. A fall from a service tower during a routine check. She'd gotten the call while on patrol, 1 foot in the snow, radio crackling, heart already racing from a separate search and rescue call. Grief hadn't come all at once. It dripped in slowly, like snowmelt from the cabin eaves in spring. One day she looked around and realized the silence wasn't temporary anymore. It was permanent. That's when the forest had started to feel less like home and more like penance. But Ranger changed that. In the early days, they didn't speak. Of course not. But there was an unspoken rhythm, a tension that hummed between them like static before a lightning strike. Ranger didn't bark much. He didn't need to. Claire could read him through his body, his subtle stance shifts, the twitch of an ear, the flattening of his shoulders when he sensed something wrong. He was loyal, but not blindly so. He respected her, but never idolized her. And in a strange way, that was what Claire needed most. Not a dog to lick her wounds, but a partner to walk beside her when no one else would. Their trust didn't come easy. The first time she tried to reach for his collar after he lunged at a coyote, he whipped his head around and snapped inches from her hand. She didn't yell. She didn't retreat. She simply stood her ground, eyes steady, and whispered, "I'm not leaving you." After that, something shifted. He started sleeping by her bed, not just near the door. He stopped flinching when she reached for him. He learned her voice, her pace, even the way she breathed when she was lying. And when Claire cried, for Luke, for her old life, for whatever guilt clawed at her gut, Ranger would nudge her with his muzzle and rest his head on her thigh. That was his way of saying, "Still here." Now, 5 years in, they were a unit. Claire hadn't returned to service since resigning after Luke's death. She'd taken to living off-grid, doing occasional freelance consultations for wildfire control, and raising bees out behind her cabin. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and Ranger liked quiet. Until the storm. That morning had shaken something loose, not just in the forest, but in Ranger. Claire had never seen him behave like that. Hackles raised, nose buried in moss like he'd caught the scent of something ancient. Not prey, not fear. It was deeper than that. After they returned from the clearing, she'd tried to distract herself. Stacked firewood, checked the radio weather band, made sourdough. But Ranger kept pacing near the edge of the yard. He'd look at the tree line, then back at her, like he was waiting. By sunset, Claire gave up pretending. She set down her tea, grabbed her headlamp, and clipped on her jacket. "All right," she said, buckling her pack. "Let's go back." Ranger trotted to her side immediately. The second time, he led her straight to the mossy patch without hesitation. Claire knelt beside it and brushed away the green with her glove. There it was again, the faint outline of a seam. Like a door had been buried, or welded shut, or simply forgotten by time. She pressed her palm against it. Cold, solid, steel. Who the hell puts a steel hatch in the middle of a forest? Ranger didn't answer, but his tail stiffened, not wagging. Alert. Claire looked around. Nothing but trees and snow and the echo of wind in the firs. But her instincts, the same ones honed from 20 years in the wilderness, whispered that they were being watched. She clicked on her flashlight and scanned the tree line. Ranger growled, low and guttural, not the sound of warning, the sound of a sentry. Claire's heart began to hammer, not from fear, from the old feeling, the one she hadn't felt in years. Something was happening here, and it had waited a long time to be found. The next morning, the rain had tapered off into a fine mist, turning the forest into a cathedral of dew and silence. Claire Buckley zipped up her canvas jacket, slung the crowbar over her shoulder, and looked down at Ranger, who was already alert, ears pricked and nose twitching. He hadn't taken his eyes off the spot since yesterday. They had returned to the mossy patch, and Claire could still see the slight depression Ranger had pawed at. Something about that dog's stillness was different today. Less curiosity, more purpose. As if he knew this wasn't just any scent trail. It was something buried, something wrong. She knelt, brushed aside the moss with her glove, and felt the solid resistance again. It wasn't a rock. It had edges, flat and metallic. Her breath hitched. "Let's find out what you sniffed, boy," she whispered. For the next 2 hours, Claire clawed and scraped at the forest floor, peeling away layers of mud, rotted leaves, and sinewy roots. Ranger stayed close, occasionally emitting low grumbles that prickled the hairs on her arms. Finally, the shape took form, a rectangular slab, reinforced with steel and bolted into the earth. There was no lock on top, just a recessed handle, rusted stiff. Claire wedged the crowbar beneath the seam and heaved. The metal groaned in protest, like something waking up after decades of sleep. One more push, and the door cracked open an inch. A gust of musty, ice-cold air whooshed out and hit her face like a whisper from the grave. Ranger stepped forward and let out a single, sharp bark. Not alarmed, not scared. A statement. Claire turned on her flashlight and aimed the beam downward. A narrow stairwell descended into darkness. Concrete walls, water-stained. Not a root or bug in sight. Man-made, carefully sealed. "What the hell is this?" she murmured, heart now thudding in her ears. She looked at Ranger. "You with me?" He answered by descending the first 3 steps without hesitation. Claire exhaled, pulled her jacket tighter, and followed. The stairwell led to a hallway, 8 feet below ground, cool and quiet except for the echo of their footsteps. The flashlight flickered against the damp concrete. Rusted piping ran along the ceiling, and faded military green paint flaked from the walls. She passed a generator room, long silent, and a row of small rooms with bunks and shelves. It wasn't just a bunker. This had been built to last, to hide something. In the 3rd room on the right, Claire found a filing cabinet, its drawers jammed with yellowed folders and maps. Some were marked in red ink. Project Monarch, D13, and a series of coordinates matching nearby ridgelines. She took one map and folded it into her coat. Then she heard it, a soft click. She froze, not from the door, from beneath the floorboards. Ranger's head snapped toward the sound, hackles rising. He moved to the corner of the room and began sniffing furiously at a square tile, nose pressed against the seams. Claire knelt and tapped the tile. Hollow. She jammed the crowbar into the edge and pried. The tile popped loose, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside, wrapped in a torn canvas sheet, was a case no bigger than a shoebox. Heavy. Metallic. She lifted it out, fingers trembling slightly. On top was a faded emblem she couldn't quite place. Some old military insignia with a falcon and a key. She set the case on the floor and slowly opened the latch. Inside were neat rows of gold bars. Her breath caught in her throat. She counted at least a dozen, all stamped with dates from the 1960s and serial numbers. This wasn't emergency currency, it was a hoard, hidden, forgotten, or perhaps never meant to be found. Ranger didn't move. He stood like a statue beside her, eyes locked on the door as if sensing something, or someone still watching. Claire whispered, "Who the hell buried this?" Just then, the flashlight flickered again, went dark, and from deeper inside the bunker, somewhere past the generator room, came the sound of metal shifting, a scrape, followed by silence. She reached for her pocket, fingers tightening around the grip of her old .38. "Let's move, Ranger." They backed out of the room, fast but silent. No panic, just trained, quiet movement. Years in the forest had taught Claire how to listen, how to move when something you can't see might be following. Above ground, daylight was beginning to break through the mist, but the chill from the bunker clung to her skin. She slammed the steel door shut and covered it back with moss and leaves, just as it had been. Whatever was inside wasn't meant for today. But she had the map. And she had questions. As they trekked back to the cabin, Claire glanced at Ranger trotting beside her, silent, watchful, but calm. He wasn't afraid, and that meant she wouldn't be either. Something had been waiting down there, and now it knew it had been found. The air inside the concrete bunker was heavy, stale with years of stillness, and laced with something acrid Claire couldn't name. Dust motes danced in the thin shaft of light from her headlamp as she stepped deeper in, her boots crunching on what looked like old leaves but smelled faintly of oil and rust. Ranger stayed ahead, ears high, body taut. He didn't make a sound. Not yet. But Claire could feel it in the leash, in his nerves. Something was off. The tunnel had led to a chamber about the size of a 2-car garage, tucked under the earth like a secret no one wanted found. Shelves lined the walls, their metal skeletons coated in grime. On them sat rusted radios, plastic cases with faded government stamps, and a row of binoculars still wrapped in plastic. Wires drooped like vines from the low ceiling. At the far end, a steel cabinet door hung open, its hinges groaning as she nudged it with the barrel of her walking stick. She wasn't prepared for what lay inside. Maps, dozens of them, folded, rolled, taped together with markings in red ink. Claire pulled one out and unfolded it against the concrete wall. Her breath caught. It was a topographic layout of this section of the mountain. At first glance, nothing odd, until her eyes landed on a red X directly over her cabin. Not near it. On it. She stepped back, scanning the other maps. There were more markings. Trails she knew by heart, labeled with dates, cameras, angles of vision, all too familiar. Someone had been watching her. For how long? Ranger let out a low, rolling growl behind her. He was facing a ventilation shaft, a square cut into the wall, just wide enough to crawl through. Claire moved toward him, hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm she no longer carried. "Easy, boy," she whispered, but her own voice betrayed her. It shook. Ranger didn't ease up. Instead, he barked once, sharp and commanding, then lunged at the shaft, pawing at the wall beside it. His nose pressed against the vent. And then he backed off quickly, hair bristling. Claire crouched and listened. A sound. Not loud, but there, like the briefest click of something mechanical. Then silence. Could have been a pipe settling. Could have been something else. Something listening. She reached up and carefully peeled back the grill. Cold air rushed out, not musty like the rest of the place, but sharp. Refrigerated. Conditioned. Somewhere beyond that duct there was a powered room. Alive. Backing away, Claire turned toward the shelves again. One case near the bottom looked newer than the others. She slid it out, coughed at the dust cloud, and flipped the latches. Inside were bricks. Not clay, not concrete. Gold, raw, stamped, and heavy. She froze. There were at least 10 bars, stacked and wrapped in grease-proof paper. On top of them lay a Glock 19. Not military-issued, but clean. Maintained. Claire sat back on her heels. None of this belonged here. Not in a forest, not under her home. Then she heard it. Not from the vent, not from the hall. From above. A creak. Floorboards? Ranger snapped his head upward. Then, without hesitation, bolted down the tunnel, up toward the hatch. "Ranger!" Claire stumbled after him, maps clutched in one hand, Glock in the other. She hadn't fired a weapon in years, hadn't needed to. But now, the weight of it in her palm steadied her. She emerged into light just as Ranger burst from the underbrush, nose high, scanning. He wasn't barking anymore, he was searching. Claire looked around. No tracks, no sound. The forest stood still. Then, in the distance, a flash of white between the trees. Gone in an instant. She didn't chase it. Not yet. Instead, she looked down at the gun in her hand, then at the bunker door, still ajar, then back at Ranger. His eyes met hers. Steady, watchful. "You knew something was wrong before I did," she said quietly. Ranger didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night, Claire didn't sleep in the cabin. She and Ranger camped under the stars, her back against a tree, the Glock never leaving her side. Something had been under her feet all these years. Something old, something buried. And someone, maybe more than one, knew she had found it. But if they thought Claire Buckley would scare easy, they hadn't counted on the dog beside her, or what she'd already survived. The forest didn't belong to whoever had drawn those maps. Not anymore. Claire didn't speak a word on the drive back from the ridge. The roads were slick from last night's rain, her knuckles white against the wheel, as Ranger shifted restlessly in the passenger seat, ears flicking towards her, then back toward the trees rushing by. He sensed it, her unease, but she wasn't ready to say it out loud. She told herself she had imagined it. The maps, the surveillance gear, the gold, the assault rifle, it couldn't mean what she feared. Maybe it was just some old Cold War fallout shelter, some eccentric prepper with too much time and too little trust. "That's all it is," she whispered to herself, trying to will her heart to stop hammering. "Just a long-forgotten bunker." Ranger let out a soft grunt. Not quite agreement. By the time they pulled up to the cabin, late afternoon sunlight spilled through breaks in the cloud cover, casting the woods in gold and rust. The mountain air smelled of pine and moss, and something else Claire couldn't name. Something metallic, old, and watching. She paused on the porch before unlocking the door, scanning the tree line behind her. Nothing. No movement. No sound beyond the breeze and Ranger's low breathing. Still, she triple-checked the lock behind her. Inside, she lit the fireplace more out of comfort than need, and set down a bowl of water for Ranger. He didn't drink. He stood by the window, body tense, tail low but not tucked, watching the woods with a posture Claire had come to recognize during her years in Afghanistan, the same way Luke used to freeze when the wind shifted direction. She turned away, shaking the thought. By the time dusk turned to night, Claire had poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and settled into her reading chair, trying to distract her brain with a battered copy of The Things They Carried. She never got past the second page. Ranger growled, a low, resonant rumble that vibrated against the floorboards. Claire looked up. Was at the door, rigid, staring into the darkness beyond the front window. Then came the sound, faint, almost lost in the wind. A car engine. Not on her road, it was too far off, but close enough. She flicked off the lamp and moved to the window. Headlights. 2 of them. They rolled to a slow stop just outside Henderson's general store, the only building still lit this time of night down in the valley. Claire's cabin sat up near the tree line. From her spot, she had a partial view of town, especially the store's gravel lot. Her binoculars were in the kitchen drawer, and she moved fast. When she returned, Ranger was still at the window. She knelt beside him, glass pressed to her eyes. One man stepped out. Tall, stocky build, clean-cut in a way that didn't match most locals. He walked like he didn't need to look behind him. Claire zoomed in as he approached the store's door. Her hands stiffened. Not military, not law enforcement, at least not obviously. But there was something calculated about the way he moved. A few moments later, through the glass front of the store, she could make out his silhouette talking to old Tom Henderson. They exchanged a few words. Then Henderson's hand raised and pointed. Up the mountain. Claire lowered the binoculars. Her stomach dropped. There it was. Her mistake. Denial. She should have trusted the dog. Should have followed her gut. She turned to Ranger. They're looking for us. Ranger didn't move. His ears twitched. His gaze stayed fixed on the woods. Not toward the store. Toward the back of the house. Claire rose slowly, walked to the rear window. At first she saw nothing. Then she saw it. A faint red glint. Small. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't trained to notice it. A laser, painted on a tree near the edge of the clearing. She dropped low, heart slamming in her chest. "We need to go," she said. But Ranger didn't follow. He was already moving. To the back door, snarling, teeth bared. Claire reached under the couch and pulled out the shotgun Luke had left her. She hadn't touched it in years. She loaded it fast, hands trembling only slightly. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. Outside the wind rose. Another vehicle rolled to a stop, closer this time. Claire and Ranger crouched by the door, waiting. Whatever was coming, they wouldn't wait long. Claire waited until the town fell into sleep. By 3 a.m., the valley was dark, save for a few amber porch lights scattered like low-burning coals across the foothills. She parked her truck a quarter-mile down the trail, wrapped Ranger's reflective collar in a black sock, and whispered, "No light, no sound." Ranger didn't need instruction. His body moved like smoke across the forest floor, controlled, deliberate. Whatever this place was, whatever had triggered his instinct before, he remembered. And tonight, he was leading. They reached the trap door by moonlight, the same patch of ground near the rock shelf, mostly hidden by pine needles and brush. Claire dropped to one knee, brushed back the cover, and gripped the rusted handle. Her breath fogged in the cold air as she opened it. The same ladder descended into darkness, but this time she came prepared, with gloves, a flashlight, and a sidearm holstered under her jacket. Ranger went in first. Claire followed, the old metal ladder creaking under her weight. Her flashlight beam danced across the concrete walls of the bunker, catching dust motes and cobwebs. until it caught something else. Something new. A coffee mug. Still half full. She froze. That hadn't been there the first time. She was sure of it. Ranger moved silently ahead, pausing at each room, nose twitching, tail still. Not fearful, but focused. His paws made no sound on the smooth concrete floor. Claire followed him into the main chamber. The place looked untouched from her last visit, except for a small black notebook left open on the desk. She approached it slowly, scanning the room first. No cameras, no tripwires, but she couldn't shake the sensation that she was being observed. Not from the trees this time, from inside. She flipped through the notebook. The handwriting was jagged, fast, all caps. Jan, 1996, accident near Rio Verde, female, age 28, never located. Mother claims FBI intervened. June 1999, suicide at Fort Bragg, male, LTC, file sealed. Names, places, patterns. Every page chronicled a disappearance. Not random, not scattered, connected. Each incident tied, directly or tangentially, to someone in federal service. Whistleblowers, military contractors, junior analysts, even postal workers. Claire kept flipping. She hit a name that made her heart stutter. Luke Spencer, July 2013, Afghanistan, status, Kia, observed at bunker site, U.S. soil, AUG 2016. She stared at the page, her husband's name, written in the same ink as the rest. Casual, cold. But Luke had died overseas. The military had sent a casket, a folded flag, his boots. But what if... She flipped the next page with shaking hands. A sketched map. Her mountain. Her cabin. A red X, less than a mile from where she now stood. Coordinates handwritten underneath. Ranger growled. Not loud. A low, guttural warning. Then he darted toward the far wall, nose pressed to a rust-colored panel. Claire followed. It wasn't just a wall. It was a false front, slightly recessed, marked by scrape lines where something had been slid back and forth. She pushed on it. Nothing. Ranger pawed the floor. Then she saw it. A latch, hidden under a storage bin labeled surplus wiring. She opened it, and the panel swung open with a quiet hiss of hydraulics. Inside was a second room, smaller, cooler, the air sharp with metal and oil. Stacks of metal cases lined the walls, not labeled, but heavy. She popped one open. Gold bars. Old ones, government-stamped, but no longer traceable, serials filed off. Claire stepped back, bile rising in her throat. It was true. She scanned the rest of the room and spotted something else. A blinking light. A signal receiver, no larger than a radio. Still running. Still sending out short-range pings, like a beacon. Low frequency, easily missed. This place was still active. Whoever had built it, whoever had buried it, hadn't abandoned it. They'd simply waited. Claire backed out, heart racing, then looked down. Ranger stood at the entrance of the hidden room, blocking her path, growling louder now. His gaze wasn't on her. It was behind her. She turned. Footsteps, not loud, soft-soled, moving fast across the bunker entrance. She lunged for the light switch. Darkness swallowed them. Silence. Even Ranger didn't breathe. Then came the unmistakable sound of the trapdoor above, slowly closing, locking them in. Claire clicked her flashlight off. She crouched low, pressing her back to the wall. This wasn't a relic. It wasn't history. This was still happening. And someone knew she'd returned. The wind cut through the pines like a whisper warning of what was to come. Claire adjusted the strap on her backpack and crouched beside a twisted juniper, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Ranger was 20 paces ahead, head low, ears twitching in every direction. His body moved in slow, deliberate steps, like a predator. But Claire had learned something over the past weeks. When Ranger slowed down, something was wrong. She stood. "Come on, boy. Let's just get to the ridge and—" Ranger froze. Then, with a sharp growl, he turned and launched back toward her. Claire barely had time to duck when a figure burst from behind a tree, dressed in camo, arm raised. The man lunged. She stumbled backward, hit a rock, and went down hard. Her breath punched out of her lungs. The man stood over her, face obscured by a black mask, his silhouette framed by the gold evening light, slanting through the forest. One hand pulled a pistol from his waistband. His other reached for her backpack. Ranger hit him mid-lunge. The sound was a sickening crunch. Muscle, bone, and surprise colliding. The attacker went down screaming, twisting as the German Shepherd sank his teeth into the man's arm. The gun skidded away. Claire grabbed it. But then 3 more shadows appeared in the distance. Men. Armed. Ranger released the first attacker with a final snap of his jaws, then circled back to Claire, pressing against her legs, urging her up. "No time!" Claire hissed to herself. She didn't need to be told twice. They ran. Branches whipped her face. She held the stolen gun tight against her chest, her breath loud in her ears, lungs burning with every step. Ranger zigzagged ahead, his instincts flawless, avoiding open ground, darting between trees, always leading her the way animals know when the earth is no longer safe. Behind them, the shouts of the men faded. They didn't stop until the sun was nearly gone. Claire dropped behind a boulder and collapsed, gasping. Ranger sat beside her, chest heaving, muzzle speckled with blood. He didn't seem to care. "Good boy," she whispered, reaching for him with trembling fingers. "I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were you." The voice came from the darkness behind them. Claire scrambled to her feet, gun raised. A man stood there, hands open in peace, though his eyes, pale blue and sharp as ice, held the weariness of someone who hadn't slept in years. He stepped forward slowly, enough light hitting his face now for her to see the grey in his beard. His clothes were military grade, but old. Faded patches, torn sleeves. A sat phone hung from his belt, along with a sidearm that remained holstered. "You the girl living up at Bell's Hollow?" he asked. "With the dog." Claire didn't answer. She didn't lower the gun either. "I was part of the program," the man said. "Back when we thought we were the good guys." "What program?" "Gold, disappearances, asset laundering. All those pages you found, that was just the topsoil?" Ranger moved between them, but didn't growl. His head tilted, tail stiff. He was reading the man, and something in his posture said, for now, this wasn't a threat. The man looked down at the dog with quiet respect. "He's smarter than most people I've met in Washington." Claire finally spoke. "Who are you?" "Elijah Boone. Used to go by Eli when I had people to talk to." He looked past her toward the mountains. "I ran comms for the extraction team back in '94. When the field site went dark, I asked questions. Wrong ones." Claire narrowed her eyes. "So they tried to kill you?" "No, worse." He met her gaze. "They made me vanish. Officially, I died in a boating accident on Lake Havasu. My wife got a folded flag. My son got a stepdad. And me? I got exiled here. Off-grid, off-books." Claire felt something cold curl in her gut. "You found the vault, didn't you?" Eli asked, voice softer now. She didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "You found what they would kill to keep hidden. You found the weight of $1 billion worth of silence." Claire's breath caught. "You mean the gold?" "I mean the paper trail, the transactions, the military contractors, the names in that logbook. Some of them are in office right now, some are running agencies, some run more than that." Ranger gave a soft whine, like a warning. Eli stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They're watching you, Claire. That tracker in the radio, not just for listening, it pings." Her stomach flipped. "They know where I live." "Not just that. They know where you sleep, where you shop, who you speak to. You haven't just stumbled onto history, you've stepped into a war that never ended. Claire's hands were trembling now, even with the gun still up. Eli looked down at Ranger. You got one advantage. That dog. He doesn't hesitate. Ranger's ears perked at the tone. Eli crouched slowly, not reaching, just holding Ranger's eyes. They trained you right, didn't they? You're the kind of soldier they never wanted walking out alive. Claire finally lowered the gun. Her voice was hoarse. What do I do now? Eli stood. You survive, and then you decide if the truth is worth more than your life. The trees whispered again around them, but this time the wind didn't feel alone. Claire looked at Ranger. Ranger looked back, then stepped closer, nudging her hand with his nose. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was running alone. Claire crouched behind a crumbling rock shelf, breath held as headlights cut through the trees below. Her hands were scraped raw, her jeans torn, and her chest burned from the sprint up the ridge. Next to her, Eli adjusted the bolt on his old rifle, well worn, like its owner. And Ranger, the dog that had somehow become the soul of this impossible mission, lay belly down, eyes locked on the movement below. His ears twitched once, a silent signal. Danger was close. 3 of them, Eli whispered, voice like rust peeling off an old hinge. Setting charges? They're gonna level that whole damn hill if we don't move fast. Claire nodded, her face pale but resolute. Then we don't wait. They had a plan. Sloppy, desperate, stitched together with hope and half-truths, but it was all they had. Back at the bunker, hours earlier, they'd followed Ranger's nose to a rusted panel behind the main server rack. Buried inside, backup data drives, encrypted but intact. Ranger had led them to it with laser focus, sniffing the stale air, pawing at the concrete until Claire pried it open. Claire didn't waste time. She pulled the battered tactical radio from Eli's pack, an old military-grade model with a fried screen but a functional transmitter. It buzzed to life with a hiss. She rewired the frequency, just as Eli had shown her, tapping into a backdoor access channel, one used by the shadow operation itself. If anyone was listening, this would hit the same ears that tried to bury the truth. And more importantly, it would hit the ones trying to expose it too. Her fingers hovered over the mic. This is Claire Hanley. I'm transmitting from coordinates 43.215, 72.119, just west of the Devil's Spine. I have proof of criminal activities tied to the disappearance of federal assets, missing persons cases spanning 2 decades, and the illegal use of public land for covert laundering. I'm attaching the data dump now. If you hear this, send help, or send someone who will listen. She hit send. Nothing but static. Then, one blip, a confirmation ping. Someone had received it. I hope to God it was the right someone. Eli muttered. Now, watching the hillside swarm with men in black fatigues, setting demolition charges, Claire felt the weight of it all crushing her lungs. But she didn't flinch. Ranger rose slowly, ears pricked, tail rigid. He glanced up at Claire, then toward the southern slope. Another path, hidden by brush. A way down, a way around, a way in. He's got an idea, Claire said. Then we follow the dog. Eli replied without hesitation. They slipped down the ridge, feet crunching leaves and loose rock, adrenaline drowning pain and fear. Ranger led them like a ghost through the dark. Past traps, past perimeter alarms. He paused only once, head tilted, nose flaring, and then moved again. Without him, they'd have triggered 6 sensors. 10 minutes later, they were at the storage trailers near the hilt of the operation. Inside those trailers, more files, backup drives, and maybe even names. Names of the missing. Names of the guilty. Claire slipped inside while Eli kept watch, and Ranger stood post at the door. Inside, dust and silence. Then her flashlight hit rows of labeled boxes, some with government seals half scratched off, others with handwritten tags like Doc Delta 97 or Evidence C4R. She grabbed what she could: paperwork, old laptops, a tablet with a cracked screen that somehow still lit up, and bolted. Outside, Ranger gave a low, sharp bark. A warning. They didn't wait. Claire and Eli ran, vaulting over brush, ducking low. Explosions thundered behind them as charges began to detonate. The air turned hot. Soil rained from above. One more blast and the trail behind them collapsed. But they were alive. They made it to the creek, where Eli's old truck lay half-buried under pine needles. He turned the key. Nothing. Again. Then, on the third try, the engine roared. They drove all night. At dawn, they pulled into a forgotten ranger station miles out, where Claire uploaded the full data package to every email on a list she'd compiled. Whistleblower networks, 2 major newspapers, and 1 trusted agent at the FBI. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, it was out. Every file, every name. Claire stepped out of the truck, knees trembling. Ranger jumped down beside her, muddy and tired but alert. He sat beside her, eyes scanning the horizon like a sentinel who didn't trust peace, not even now. "You did good," she said softly. He leaned into her thigh, a weight and a warmth that held her upright. And miles away, the men who thought they'd buried the truth were already beginning to panic. The night sky above the forest split open in beams of white as helicopters descended, their searchlights cutting through the haze like celestial swords. The old military compound rumbled beneath the noise, and the pines quivered in the shock waves. From her perch behind a broken window in the communications shack, Claire could feel her pulse echoing in her teeth. Ranger was already gone, a blur of fur and muscle darting toward the northern entrance of the underground vault. Eli crouched beside her, one eye still shadowed from the hit he'd taken earlier. His hand gripped the worn pistol he had sworn he'd never touch again. "They're gonna burn it," he muttered. "I heard them say it on comms. They're lighting the whole place up, all of it. Files, servers, gear, everything." Claire pressed the button on the battered handheld radio still connected to the relay. "Copy that. Teams are inbound. Do not engage unless necessary," came the distant voice of a federal contact. "We've got eyes, but we need that drive." The drive. The last full copy of the encrypted data, the map, the logs, the proof of a decades-old laundering ring masked as missing persons reports, wrapped in Defense Department signatures and false FEMA directives. If they lost that, the House of Cards might just stand tall enough to survive. And that's why Ranger had gone in alone. Claire's hands shook as she adjusted the frequency scanner. Static fought her every move, but she forced herself to breathe. Suddenly, an explosion shook the compound. The western side of the vault lit up in flame. Eli ducked instinctively, dragging Claire down with him. "They're starting it now," he growled. "They don't care about getting out, just keeping the truth buried." Smoke bled through the treetops, a thick, acrid warning. Claire started to rise, but a guttural bark tore through the air, sharp, urgent, close. Not a bark of warning. A signal. "Ranger," she breathed. She bolted out the shack's side door, Eli hot on her heels, both weaving through the fog and falling ash. They found him on the ridge behind the vault. His left flank was bloodied, a gash from the earlier scuffle reopened, but he stood tall, guarding a burnt figure slumped near a steel case. Claire recognized the man, Agent Lowell, one of the embedded operatives. Dead. A shattered pistol lay beside him. In his final moments, he must have tried to destroy the drive, but Ranger got there first. The German Shepherd's jaws were clenched around the corner of the case, just enough to keep it from sliding off the cliff's edge, just enough to save the contents from ruin. Claire dropped to her knees, tears stinging her eyes as she reached out and carefully took the case from him. "Good boy," she whispered. Her hands shook harder than ever, not from fear, but something deeper, relief, awe. Helicopter blades beat louder overhead. Voices crackled in her earpiece. "We have visual. Team Alpha approaching south entrance. Confirm target." Claire rose, holding the case high. "Confirmed. Data secure. Repeat. Data secure." Searchlights found them in seconds. Ranger didn't flinch. He stood between Claire and the wind, body bruised, ears high, chest heaving like a furnace ready to blow. Federal agents stormed the compound from every direction. A firefight erupted near the east wing. Shouts, flashes, then silence. The enemy had tried one last stand, but it was over. Eli watched it unfold with tired eyes. "You ever think," he said quietly, "some dogs know what they're fighting for more than the men who trained them?" Claire nodded, eyes never leaving Ranger. "I don't think he's fighting anymore," she said. "He's protecting." By dawn, the compound was in federal hands. Fire crews doused the last embers, while analysts in hazmat suits catalogued every scrap of intel left behind. The vault's blueprints, burn logs, even satellite pings from drones that shouldn't have been in U.S. airspace. All of it was real. All of it damning. The headlines wouldn't be able to look away. And Ranger? He lay beside the case, head resting on one paw, finally allowing his body to relax. He didn't need applause or medals. He had Claire's hand resting gently on his back, and that was enough. The truth had surfaced, not by whistleblowers or senators, but by a soldier no longer in uniform, a girl too stubborn to quit, and a dog who refused to leave a single truth buried. It had been 7 months since the last helicopter rose above the treetops, kicking up ash and broken pine needles from the mountain that once held a buried truth. The fire scars had faded, replaced by fresh shoots of green. But the past had not vanished. It had simply made peace with the land. Claire stayed, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because she knew the story wasn't done. The world now knew about the hidden vault, the shadow organization, the decades of cover-up. Reporters came and went. Students, too, hiking up the trail in groups, eyes wide, notebooks in hand, hoping to catch a glimpse of where it all happened. Some brought gifts, little tokens they left by the porch, badges, dog biscuits, thank-you notes. Ranger had aged. His once jet-black fur was flecked with silver now, his gait slower, but his eyes just as sharp. He still took his place by the front porch every morning, scanning the tree line. Not to guard gold anymore, but because he belonged there. That mountain had become his ground to watch over, his peace to protect. Claire rebuilt the cabin from the bones of the old one. It was modest, 2 rooms, a wide porch, a radio that barely picked up anything but static unless the wind blew just right. She didn't need much. She spent her days guiding curious university teams through the ruins of the underground vault. The tunnels had collapsed for the most part, but the skeleton of the place still whispered stories if you listened hard enough. One morning, as autumn rolled back over the ridge and painted the woods in orange and blood red, a little girl in a red hoodie lingered behind the tour group. She was no older than 10, clutching a laminated photo of Ranger she'd found in a news article. Her hair was braided tightly, her eyes bright with a kind of reverence that only children carried. "Is that him?" she asked, pointing to Ranger, who sat upright, alert but calm. Claire nodded. The girl walked closer, slowly until she was just a few feet away. Ranger didn't move, just watched her, head slightly tilted. She knelt and held the photo up to compare. Then she whispered, as if it were a secret not meant for grown-ups. "They said he guarded gold, but my brother told me. He didn't just guard treasure, he guarded the truth." Claire smiled. Your brother was right. The girl stood up, brushing her hands on her jeans. I want to be like him someday. You'd be lucky, Claire said. We all would. That night, after the last jeep rumbled back down the trail, Claire sat on the steps beside Ranger. The stars stretched above them, clear and cold. Ranger rested his chin on her boot, ears still flicking at every sound in the woods. Remember that night? Claire whispered. The one with the rain and the fire and the whole world caving in? Ranger didn't move. You knew, she said, before anyone else. You always knew. In the distance, an owl called. Ranger blinked slowly, then settled deeper against her foot. Claire leaned back and looked at the stars, her hand resting on Ranger's back. There are things gold can't buy, she said, and truth doesn't bury easy. Guess that's why they needed you. The porch light flickered once and held steady. The mountain was quiet, save for the wind. As the screen door creaked open behind them, a teenage boy stepped out, a new assistant from the nearby university. He was holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Miss Claire, you got another story for us tonight? He asked. Claire took the mug, warm in her hands. Only if you're ready to hear one that doesn't end the way you expect. The boy grinned. Those are the best kind. She looked down at Ranger. Aren't they, old friend? His tail thumped once against the wood. So what remains? Not the vault, not the secrets, not even the scars. What remains is the silence of the forest after the noise fades. What remains is a dog who never quit. What remains is a truth so stubborn it needed 4 legs and a loyal heart to carry it. And maybe, just maybe, what remains is a question for you. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you believe loyalty still matters in this world, like Ranger did, subscribe to our channel, share this story, and tell us below. We'd love to hear it.